Holy One who goes by many names, Spirit of all of our lives, of the sunshine and the darkness. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to our musicians and Riley for his lovely, what do you call those things, reflection this morning. Our reading today is a UU classic from the poet Mary Oliver. It's called Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies, and the deep trees, and the mountains, and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. Well, 3 weeks ago, when we were somewhere between snowstorms number 14 and 15, I think, of our winter season, Peter, your minister, asked me what I plan to preach about when I joined you all here for now what I think is the 4th time that I've had the pleasure to visit and lead worship at this congregation. And on that icy, snowy day in January, looking out the window, the choice seemed easy. I would preach about the cold. There was very little else on our minds at certain points during this winter season, right? And I remember sending off the email to Peter that afternoon thinking, now that I've made this commitment to preach about the cold and the snow, it's going to end up being 65 and sunny the Sunday that I go. Well, it's not quite 65. It is sunny. We are getting a quick break from the cold this late February. But with more snow forecast next week, I think this message will still apply. And of course, this idea of cold, this idea of the struggle through cold, patience, persistence through challenging or frustrating times in our lives, is an idea that knows no season. There are always some struggles that we are dealing with. There are often winters in our lives, cold seasons that we may feel are often with us, often returning. I'm serving, as Riley mentioned, as the ministerial intern this year at the Wellsprings congregation. It's a UU congregation that some of you might know out in Chester County, just down the road. And one of the least expected and most gratifying areas of ministry that I've been learning about in my internship has come from working with a minister, my supervisor, the Reverend Ken Belden, who is in recovery. He is open about his process of recovery from alcoholism. And I'm working with a congregation that has decided to serve its community from this same place of vulnerability, because there are others within the congregation who are on the same journey that Reverend Ken is on. This congregation has built a thriving and active and groundbreaking ministry around the issue and experience of addiction and recovery. They are working to bring out of the shadows a lifelong struggle that for so many is incredibly wrapped up and connected with shame and secrecy and fear. And where it's appropriate, they're working to help people to coax that conversation out into the open, encouraging people who struggle with addictions of all kinds to seek and receive the help that they need. Now, for me, working and ministering alongside these incredible people has taught me so much about an important distinction that is made within the recovery community, about what it means to be recovering and not recovered. What it means to recognize that we are all in a process, on a journey, rather than simply working towards a destination in our lives. Recovery, as I am learning, as I am coming to understand it, has a lot to teach all of us about other experiences in our lives that never really reach an endpoint. The cyclical nature of the seasons is one example, the emotional ebb and flow of our relationships with our loved ones, the regular rotation of daytime and nighttime, the endless reality throughout our days of new birth and ultimate death. These cycles are with us in many ways. And yet so much in our world, and particularly in our Western American framework, is not structured to reflect a cyclical model of reality, right? It's structured to reflect a linear progression model, moving from point A to point B to point C, all according to plan. It's the progression model that we all learned first as children. We graduate from kindergarten to first grade, and then elementary school to middle school to high school, getting better and better, smarter and smarter along the way, right? We earn our way through. And then we find ourselves released into adult life, but it doesn't end there, because we have self-help books, and we have The Biggest Loser, and we have the corporate ladder, and the elusive promise of work-life balance. All of these paths that lure us into thinking we can always be better, stronger, faster. From my colleagues and congregants at Wellsprings who are in recovery, who are open about what that process has meant in their lives, I've learned about a different kind of experience. One that acknowledges right from the outset that there is no graduation day. There is no arrival at the next best thing. There is only one day at a time. One moment at a time, really. A constant return to our real and current experience in the present. A constant checking in with a struggle from which no one is ever fully recovered. So much of what we see in our world, in the media, in movies and TV, is teaching us to expect a triumphant day of victory, the climax, the end scene of the movie. But that's not how our lives usually work. Our lives are not typically a consistent linear march toward progress. At least my life hasn't been. They are a mix, our lives. They're a mix of the good and the bad. They're a cycle, just like the seasons. Now, this seems like a very rational and realistic way to look at the world, to understand our positive and our negative experiences as both inevitable and both part of our lives, to recognize that we'll never reach a day when all is truly perfect and working in perfect harmony, when all our flaws and foibles are fully worked out, when all our relationships and interactions with each other and projects and conference calls and AP English papers go exactly as we plan them. And yet I know that I often live as if that day is coming. That perfect day. As if I could just get it together. And if all the conditions could be right, it would all fall into place and I would have that moment of peace I wouldn't be mixed up in the messy process of life. No, I would have arrived. The arrival looks different for all of us. For some of us, it's a particular job, a level of professional success, financial security. For some of us, it is retirement, finding a partner, having a child, seeing our child go off to college. It's not wrong to want these things. But what happens when we put our lives on hold until we get there? It's this idea, this hope out there in the future that one day we will arrive that can lead us to resist the cold. It can lead us to resist the winter season when things aren't exactly the way that we want them to be. And so because we have our eyes out there on the future, on that prize, we look for the fix or the way out or the next good thing, whatever that next better, stronger, faster thing looks like in that moment. When winter storm number 18 or so was forecast, sometime back towards the beginning of February, I started saying to people, you know what, let's just cancel February. Please, let's just get rid of it and skip to March. I was kind of serious when I said that. Because I'd made such a strong statement. I think it also, though, made me stop and look at myself and look at what I'd been saying. February, it's here. It's winter. We can't cancel it. No, it's not my favorite season of the year. But it's here. How much am I making myself miserable on top of how much it might be making me miserable? And so I actually did what Riley said earlier. I Googled a list of good things about winter. And it helped. And I started to think about how it's not all bad in February. On the list were things like hot chocolate, sunshine, glimmering through the ice on trees, dogs in sweaters. How can you not like a season that has dogs in sweaters? And so here I was saying, let's cancel this month. And it's hyperbole, right? It obviously can't happen. But how many of us have ever said something like that about a time in our lives? How many of us have ever lived our lives like that? Discounting and denying what's happening in the present because we don't like it. Shutting down. Turning off our awareness of our experience and focusing on what's not here yet instead of on what is here and where we are. We numb ourselves. We escape. And when we do this, we give up being fully alive. We give up those cold days. Unproductive as they are, we give up those fallow times. The miracles that are still there within them, and what they may have to teach us. The Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, tells a lot of great stories. And he tells a story about his friend Jim, an American Catholic peace activist. Now, Thich Nhat Hanh and Jim are two highly spiritual, advanced men, and they are taking a break from their work at a conference where they're talking about their plans and ideas for the future. As they take this break, they sit under a tree and they begin a conversation about all of the world-changing, peace-building ideas they have, all of these plans, this really ambitious stuff that they want to create and work on. And as they talked, Jim pulled out a tangerine, and he peeled it and began to eat it. And as he got more and more excited in his story, and more engrossed in his ideas about the future, he started to separate those sections of the tangerine and pop them piece after piece into his mouth, mechanically. Not even really stopping to finish chewing and swallowing one piece before he took another section in his hand. And Thich Nhat Hanh, in watching him, began to realize that Jim wasn't even aware that he was eating this tangerine anymore. He was so lost in what was going on in his mind and all of these ideas about where he was going to be. And so he stopped Jim mid-sentence, and he said, "You know, Jim, you ought to eat that piece of tangerine you've already taken." Jim stopped, and he looked at the section in his hand. He swallowed, and then he ate it slowly and paused for a moment. And he said, "Thank you." At Wellsprings, we have a 9-week membership class for our new members. And one of the things that we do with everyone who takes this class is a tangerine meditation. And I had to do it. I sat in on one of these classes for my internship. I'll be leading one in the spring. And when they handed out the tangerines, I kind of groaned because I don't like tangerines. I've never liked citrus fruit. I don't know why. And we spent 20 minutes eating and meditating on tangerines. We held them in our hands, we rolled them around, we smelled them, we listened to them, which was funny at first, but then when you peel a tangerine and listen to it, it kind of sounds amazing. We smelled them, we squeezed each little section, we popped them in our mouths, and we chewed them slowly and felt the juice burst. I still don't like tangerines, but I kind of loved that tangerine because I was paying attention to it in a different way. It wasn't existing for me. I was kind of learning to love it for what it had to offer on its own terms. And I can tell you, hand on my heart, that I still hate cold, wet weather. And I do have an unfortunate tendency to take it personally, to act like it's a personal affront to me when the weather is not 82 and sunny. I am unpleasant to myself, and I am unpleasant to be around. You can imagine how much fun I've been this winter. And this winter has been hard. For many of us, we've lost power, we've lost our peace, we've lost productive days of work and days of our summer vacations. We've had to grumble through yet another morning of shoveling and had to drive white-knuckled one too many times on ice-covered roads. We should dance with joy at this brief respite from the cold, and we should celebrate the arrival of spring and warm sun and new life and wet dirt and freshly budding plants. But I have bad news. Winter is coming back. And not just on Tuesday, but next year. And the year after that. Winter is always coming back. This endless cycle of frustration and reward, of numbing our experience through the cold times, may not be the most fruitful way to live our lives. Maybe I can learn to love the wet, cold days, even if I don't like them. Maybe we can slow down enough to be present to our lives in the middle of what is hard and cold for us, instead of waiting for that elusive perfect moment when we've got it all together, when all the conditions are right. Maybe we can grant ourselves the grace and the forgiveness to say, this is still a work in progress. This will always be a work in progress. Nature gives us a pretty good model for how to do this. The sun rises every day, and the darkness always returns at night. This world and this universe mirrors our experience. It's not a progression, and it was never promised to be one. It's a cycle, a process that goes one day at a time. We will have seasons in our lives. And if you have ever been brought out of a cold, hard season just when you thought the cycle was over, wasn't going to come back around, then you know that this cycle is actually good news. That there is tremendous power in it all around you. It's the power of friends. It's the power of nature. It's the power of divine love and justice. Through the cold, even if we can't see it, it's there. It's preparing. The stem from the bulb moves towards the earth's surface under the ground. The sun shines across the other side of the earth, even in the middle of the night, before we ever see it on the horizon. This is a UU kind of faith, folks. The faith that the sun always rises and that the seasons will turn. That new life will spring up from that dirt, no matter how many times we see death and cold and darkness come. There is something eternal here, and it contains all of us, all of our lives. So when we can appreciate the tangerine, not our favorite fruit, the winter, not our favorite season, the mundane and the cold, hard things for what they are, when we allow what must lie dormant in those fallow seasons of our lives to simply lie there, and maybe lie down next to them, when we can be present for the experience of our lives, we will find a new understanding of what faith can mean for us. I can't tell you what lessons this winter has to teach you. Only you know that. But I hope that you will rest in them. You will absorb them. You will leach whatever they have to offer up from the ground. I hope that we'll all find that these cold times are part of the whole of our lives, and that with faith, we'll be ready to receive springtime when the buds on the trees appear once more. Amen.